You're going to generate that full $100,000, or even if you do, the point is your mortgage payment is not going to be allowed to be greater than $90,000 a year. Okay, is everybody cool with that? So that leaves you. I'm sorry.
When you do the deal, you can't keep some of that.
Yeah, and you also, as an investor, you're going to want to keep some of that money for yourself. So in this case, it still gives you technically 909.09.09, basically $9,090.91 left over for before tax cash flow. Okay, is everybody cool with that? Yes or no? Now that, just to kind of put things into perspective, that is with a debt service coverage ratio of 1.10. Well, what if the lender raises that requirement because it's a higher risk property and they say a 1.3? Okay, so we have to do the math again. All right, so in this case, our net operating income is staying constant, but our debt service coverage ratio is going up to a 1.3. So $100,000 divided by 1.3 means a maximum debt service of $76,923.08, let's say. Okay, so once again, we have an net operating income of $100,000, but they're saying the maximum payment that they will allow is the $76,923.08. Which means then you would have income of $23,076.92. Okay? Now, the thing to keep in mind here, you're saying, well, wait a second, that actually sounds better for me because I'm making more money. Well, yes and no. You are making more money, but you're effectively not borrowing as much. Okay? And so it's a question of, do you prefer to borrow the money, or do you prefer, you know, in essence, have to put more money in as equity? And we're going to get into sort of those returns on equity and kind of the financial leverage and all that sort of stuff, you know, here a little bit later. But right now, what I want you to focus on are these two numbers.
So as a user, a borrower, we want that number to be as close to 1 as possible.
Yes.
Okay.
Assuming that you feel super confident about the property and the income stream and the strength of that income stream. Okay? Because the last thing, I mean, in a perfect world, yeah, you would love to be able to max out that debt and get it as close to, you know, the income stream that's actually producing. But what happens whenever the property enters in a downturn in the market? The rents go down, occupancy rates go down, occupancy rates go down, and maybe your expenses go up and a whole other number of things that just blow out your net operating income. So that's where, see, and it's an interesting philosophy that different people have whenever it comes to investing in real estate. That you have people on one end of the spectrum that only do all cash deals. Okay, and the reason they only do all cash deals is they don't ever want to have to worry about not being able to basically pay off a lender. Okay, now usually by doing all cash deals, they accept a lower rate of return and an unleveraged return, which we're going to get into later, but that is something that they have sort of been willing to accept. And then you have the other side of the table, the folks that are saying, give me as much debt as I can possibly, you know, be given by the lender, so I don't have to put in any more dollars of my own money than I absolutely positively have to. Well, the downside of that is, as I said, if the market rates on the rental go down just a little bit, they potentially are left in a situation where they can't afford the mortgage payment. Okay, does that make sense?
Hopefully they got extra money in the bank.
But they usually don't.
Right.
Because normally, you know, it's one of those sorts of things. Whenever people leverage themselves up to a point, you know, it's unsustainable, there's a reason for that. You know, usually in most instances, it's because they don't have the extra capital to really put into the deal. Okay, and they're trying to maximize the return. And as long as everything works out and the markets continue to go up, everything is fine. But whenever markets start to decline, those are the first people to be wiped out because they over-leverage themselves. Okay? Make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, let's just sort of take these two numbers here. And you're saying, well, how do we get to those numbers, and what are those sort of numbers inherently represent? This, in both instances, it represents the total mortgage payment over the course of a year that would include both principal as well as interest. Okay? Now, this is the part that ultimately, at the end of the day, you've actually paid for and you really want to understand. Okay? I know it's toward the end of the day and you're saying, oh, God, please no more. Stop the torture. Okay. But this is the part that is actually probably the most important part of this class and of this program to begin to understand. You're going to hear it more often than just today, but I think introducing it to you today is probably a good thing so that you kind of begin to understand it. Okay. So let's just take each of these numbers for a second here. And let's just start with the 9090909. Okay, that's an annual number. We want to convert that into a monthly payment. All right, so let's just start with that. 9090909 divided by 12. So that means a $7,575.76 monthly payment. Okay? Everybody cool with that? Yes or no? So the lender is simply saying your monthly payment shall not exceed that dollar amount. You're saying, okay, well, that's fine. But what's our dollar amount of our loan? This is the part you paid for. Okay? So basically, this is where we go back to our time value of money stuff. And we sort of say, okay, you got 12 payments per year. We know that we've got a maximum payment amount. If I don't get dyslexic here and write the wrong numbers. 575.76 is our monthly payment. So that's our payment amount. Okay. Now, this is the part that gets interesting. What do we have to determine? We have to determine what is going to be the term, what is our interest rate, and what we're really solving for, the magic number, is what is the loan amount. Okay? Now, there's a reason I left those two blank, because those two can change. And those two are somewhat negotiable, somewhat obviously dependent upon who you find as a lender. You may find one lender that says the maximum loan term I'll give you is a 10-year loan. Another lender may say the maximum loan term I'll give you a 30-year loan. Okay? You may find one that gives you an interest rate of 5%. You may find another one that gives you an interest rate of 10%. Okay? Well, all of that is going to dictate the amount that you're actually going to receive in terms of the actual loan amount. Does that make sense? So now if you want to maximize your loan amount, what do you want to do? You want to maximize the term and you want to minimize the interest rate. Okay? So in this case, I'm just going to sort of throw out and say, okay, let's say that I can get a 30-year mortgage. So, all right, 360 payments. All right, and then the interest rate that I'm able to get is 5% from this particular lender. Then that's going to dictate what my loan amount is. All right, so let's just see. $1,411,224.82. So that is my maximum, maximum loan amount based upon the debt service coverage ratio. Does that make sense? Yes or no? So you're basically working backwards from the income the property is generating to figure out what is the maximum loan amount. To a certain extent, this is like the example I kind of gave about you going into a car dealership, and basically the car dealership, they ask you, how much of a monthly payment can you afford? Well, it's basically the same philosophy. You're simply saying, okay, you know, based upon this property's income, how much of a loan can it afford on its own? And so what you're saying is, based upon those criteria. Now, what if we were to change the scenario and you go to where maybe the best loan that you can get is for a 15-year note at 7%. Let's see how much of a change that makes. $842,848.40. Whoops, yellow. 43 cents. Running out of space here. 43. Okay, so that's a fairly significant difference. 1.4 million versus 842,000. Okay. Yep.
How do they reconcile like the debt service coverage ratio with the loans?
I'm going to get to that. Okay. All right, but right now, fundamentally, the thing that you should take into consideration is how much of a difference is that?
Pretty big.
About $400,000.
Okay, so roughly close to $600,000. Well, do you not think that's significant? It is. It's very significant. And so significant that this hopefully begins to give you kind of, let's say those are two ends of the extreme of what's available out there, that this sort of tells you you need to shop around. And one of the things that I have this sort of way of, I guess, looking at lenders. Lenders, you're going to, at first you're not going to quite pick up on this, but then very quickly you will. Lenders are retailers. Okay? And what I mean by that, they're no different than Walmart and CVS and any other sort of retail group. And what I mean is every lender is different. You are not going to get the exact same deal going to Wells Fargo that you're going to get at Bank of America, that you're going to get at the local, farm credit sort of bureau, or, what other institution that you can pull out of thin air. Because what happens is, lenders work much in the same way about brand loyalty and customer loyalty and that sort of thing. Think about it like this, and this is especially true on the residential side, all right? You go in, you get a checking account with, let's say, Wells Fargo, all right? Now, chances are, if you need a car loan, who are you probably going to go to? Wells Fargo. If you need a home loan, who are you probably going to go to? Wells Fargo. If you need, maybe a small business loan, who are you going to go to? Wells Fargo, okay? Part of the reason that you're going to stick, potentially, with that same lender is they already have all of your banking information. And so there's going to be a lot less time and a lot less brain damage of sticking with them to get any and all of these other ancillary loans that you may be choosing to get. Now, what you may find in reality, however, is Wells Fargo may have the absolute best deal in town on car loans, but then have the absolute worst deal in town on home loans. Okay? So they use basically the car loans as a loss leader potentially for the home loans where they actually make all their money. Does that make sense? Okay, that's what I mean by lenders or retailers. So now you have to take the time and the due diligence to get out there and actually search for what are the specific, unique circumstances with one lender versus another. And it's not just about the stated interest rate. And this is part of what we're going to be exploring is you've got the stated rate of interest that they may say, this lender says it's 7%, this says it's 8%. Well, you automatically are thinking, oh, the 7% over here is the best deal, because that's a whole percent less than this 8% business over here. But what you find out later is that this lender, like we talked about earlier, is going to require you to not pay off the loan for 5 years. They're also going to require all these financial statements from you every single month. They're also going to get up in your business whenever it comes to potentially your occupancy rate falling below a certain level, and a whole number of other things that you aren't going to like. Whereas the 8% lender over here basically says, we're charging you 1% more, and we're willing to take the risk that all those things are going to work themselves out, and so we're not going to require any of that. Do you follow what I'm saying? Okay, that's what I mean that lenders or retailers, they all have their own special deal, okay? And it certainly gets into property types. You have one lender that's going to focus on retail loans, or like retail building loans, one that may focus on industrial, one that may focus on office, all based upon their own internal kind of, you know, abilities and skill sets of their particular loan officers. Yep.
And I also know a particular instance here, because I'm in real estate as a realtor, is that there's also a huge benefit for people with a relationship to their realtor, like a lender. Like there is a relationship you may have, like I had a deal with Navy Federal Credit Union, and it was like hands down the worst experience of my life, because there are just so many different, you know, ways of them. They've got one person's in Utah, another person's in Kentucky, another person's here in Florida. And then you might find that someone has a local lender here that they're able to get the job done, and at what price is that worth to you?
So the whole lesson is just focus on the variety of lenders that are out there in the marketplace, and it may not even be a local lender. It may be an out-of-town lender, maybe an online lender, you know, whatever it is, but you need to understand what are the terms they're offering you. Now, getting back to our little example here, so under this circumstance, for this property, the property hasn't changed. The property is still generating, you know, the income that it's generating of $100,000 a year, but we're just simply saying that under this circumstance, your loan could be as little as $842,000 or as much as $1.4 million. Okay? Is everybody comfortable with that? Yes or no? Okay. Now, the same sort of thing would be true if we went over and we did the math for the other scenario of the higher debt service coverage ratio. What you're going to find with that higher debt service coverage ratio is you're going to be able to borrow even less money. Okay? Does that make sense conceptually? Because obviously they're putting a maximum on the amount of the payment. Okay, now.
Is the debt service ratio dependent on anything in particular, or just the banks, the lenders?
So, they're going to look at everything from the property type, because they're saying, okay, without question, industrial is safer than, let's say, traditional retail. Okay? They're going to say multifamily residential is safer than office space. And so, as a result, that not only your interest rate, but also the terms of the deal, as well as the debt service coverage ratio, is going to vary depending on the property type and depending on the risk profile of that. Does that make sense? Okay? And what you, to a certain extent, are going to kind of explore, you know, if you sort of think about it, it's kind of like this. If we put, you know, risk over here, and we put return, or in this case, you know, the sort of the old traditional kind of risk return sort of profile, where, you know, as risk increases, basically so should your return on a particular investment. Okay? And so the point is the lender looks at this as well. The lender is sort of saying that this may be multifamily residential, multifamily residential, this might be industrial, this might be office, this might be retail, and so for each of those particular property types, that means that they're going to demand a higher rate of return, or in essence, a more conservative underwriting as you get more risky. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, part of it is subjective. There's no question about it. And within a market, it can be, you know, somewhat subjective. That a lender may sort of say, this is what they're defining as the absolute hottest area of town for development. Everything is going on there. So we're definitely going to be very proactive in lending that particular area of town. And then maybe, you know, looking at other areas of town that are less economically progressive, you know, downtrodden, you know, sort of areas that are in serious need of redevelopment, but yet, you know, they may not be willing to take on that risk to be, you know, the folks that are really involved in that redevelopment process. Does that make sense? All right. Now, okay. So getting back to the piece, when we were sort of talking about this as an underwriting model, part of your underwriting model would basically be saying, all right, you know, you determine what the appropriate debt service coverage ratio is, and your model would be maybe doing that based upon the property type, based upon the economic viability of the neighborhood, based upon the tax returns or economic wealth of the property owner or investor. Now, this is also another interesting thing to point out. Whenever you're dealing in another big difference between residential, single-family, owner-occupied real estate versus commercial real estate. With single-family, owner-occupied residential real estate, everything is based upon the income of the individual that is purchasing the property, okay? Their credit history, their income level, their money in the bank, all that sort of stuff. With commercial property, believe it or not, a little bit of attention is paid to that, but the majority of the attention is paid to the property and paid to the expected performance of that property and the historical performance of that property. And what is interesting is that historically you will find, and this is honest to God true, that you will find real estate developers and investors that can get commercial real estate loans for millions of dollars that could never get a single family home loan, okay? And that, you know, blows your mind because you're like, so the lender is willing to trust this person even though they've had 3 bankruptcies and multiple foreclosures and whatever else to get, you know, a commercial loan? Yeah. And part of the reason for that is, number one, they're banking it all on the economic viability of the property itself and of the tenants within the property. One of the things that more progressive commercial lenders have done is take it even a step further. They've sort of said, we're not even going to base it on the investor at all. We're going to look exclusively to the tenants and who the tenants are, okay? Because if they're all Class A tenants that have track records that are absolutely immaculate, that's all that really matters. Because they're going to pay their rent, therefore, we're going to be able to collect our mortgage payment. Does that make sense? Okay? Now, what they may do is what I was talking about earlier. They may say, we don't trust the borrower, so we're going to require every one of those tenants to make a lockbox payment every month, so that Starbucks, as your tenant, is going to write a check and it's going to go directly to the bank, and then the bank is going to take out their monthly mortgage payment and then send you the rest of the money to pay the other bills. Does that make sense? Okay? So, before I get too far off, but the idea here of the underwriting thing is part of what you're going to be determining is what is the appropriate debt service coverage ratio. And it's not an absolute science. It's one of those sorts of things that you're going to take in a variety of factors about the property and potentially about the investor. And so, and this is, you're sort of saying, okay, what about reality? That's exactly what lenders do. They all have their own individualized underwriting models, taking into account whatever factors they have deemed relevant and useful to them. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's one piece of this. Okay, everybody have a pretty good idea of what this debt service coverage ratio is? Yes? Okay, now, okay, so let's say that we accept this first one as our maximum loan amount. So $1,411,224.82. Now, is that the value of the property?
No.
No, that's just a loan amount. Okay? So, let's just kind of play some backwards math with this whole loan-to-value ratio business. Okay, we said the loan-to-value ratio is equal to the loan amount divided by the overall property value. Well, if we set the loan amount as being $1,411,224.82 and the maximum loan-to-value ratio at 80%, okay, which is, yeah, that's a reasonable one, but you're going to see some commercial loans where they won't lend more than 60 or 70% of the property value. That way they, once again, have another cushion built in there that in the event that they've got to foreclose on the property, they know they're going to get their money out of it, okay? So unlike residential lending, where you all the time will see, you know, potentially loans up to 90, 95%, in some cases almost full purchase price, on the commercial side, you'll almost never see that, okay? There are rare exceptions, but for the most part, no. Okay, so if that's the case, what is going to be the implied value of this property? $1,764,031.03. Okay? Now, I call that the implied value. Okay? So the lender, in essence, is saying your independent appraiser that actually looks at this property and values it based on its cash flows and the market conditions and everything else, they're going to need to come back with a number that is equal to or greater than $1,764,000 in order for you to be able to get this loan at 80% and max out your borrowing capacity. Does that make sense? So what if the following happens? What if a market-based appraisal is done on the property, and the market-based appraisal from the actual independent third-party appraiser comes back and the valuation on the property is $1.2 million? What happens?
Your loan is
80% of that.
You're only going to be able to borrow 80% of the 1.2 million. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Meaning, that's also going to lower your overall not only loan amount, but also your payment, so your lender should be probably happy with that, okay, all things considered. You may not be happy with it because you're going to potentially have to come out of pocket, okay, depending on what the purchase price of the property, because the purchase price could be something even different than that. The purchase price of the property could be $2 million. Okay? Just because you're willing to pay, or the market appraisal comes in at 1.2, doesn't mean that's all you may be willing to pay. You may have, you know, really deep pockets, and you're willing to come up with that full, you know, extra down payment. That just means you have that much more equity in the property. Does that make sense? Now, normally,
Why would you?
well, you probably wouldn't, okay? But I've seen stranger things, okay? That, you know, you sometimes have somebody that just is absolutely dead set, this particular location is what they want for their property, and they are bound to determine this is gonna work for them, and they're gonna figure out a way, you know, to make it work, okay? And they, once again, maybe have really deep pockets. Now, usually there's drug money involved. You know, that's a whole other, you know, thing. Different country. So, but for the most part, you know, it's stranger things have happened. Okay. All right. Any questions about this up to this point? Okay. So once again, the underwriting model, you're going to be, you know, sort of looking at a lot of the numbers associated with the property, but you're also going to be looking at, you know, a little bit of, I'm trying to think, I want to call it the fluffy stuff, but, you know, a little bit of, you know, sort of perception aspects of that particular market or that particular property, and trying to get a handle on, you know, is this, you know, truly a growth area, you know, what are maybe some of the characteristics associated with it, you know, what income levels or age levels or education levels are populating this area. So some of the stuff that you hopefully picked up like in the GIS class, if you took that, you kind of get into the psychographics kind of stuff and how you might go about quantifying, you know, some of that material into something that's useful for understanding, you know, a particular neighborhood or a particular area. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. What else? Okay, so that is sort of a nice little introduction into that. And then next week, what we're going to be doing is getting into the spreadsheet in this course, getting into a spreadsheet dealing with a full and complete amortization of mortgage loans that will be modifiable to adjust for adjustable rate mortgages, to deal with loan origination fees, prepayment penalties, servicing fees, and a whole number of other things, okay?
So should we anticipate incorporating this in our final project, the debt service coverage?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
That's my point in terms of bringing it up now, is for you to begin to think about how you can, you know, begin to sort of do that. Okay, so you will need to, as I said, think about your little groups there. Okay, a couple of other little quick things, and then we'll be done. First of all right, those of you that have completed, you know, your first semester, obviously many of you, you know, this is, you know, the end of the first 8 weeks, and you will hopefully have your grades tomorrow morning from Wurzer if you took the classes in the first 8 weeks, and you have an overall GPA greater than 3.0, then you will now qualify to basically take on a mentor, okay? And the mentorship program, the way that it works is if you meet that criteria, then we will pair you up with somebody. Now, what you should have done is you should have sent Ryan or myself basically your top 3 choices from the existing roster roll of the advisory board members. And then what we will do is then we will go through that and then try to match up people, give them hopefully their first choice, and if not, then potentially second and third choice. And those decisions to a certain extent are going to be made upon who submitted first, okay? Sort of first in line. If you were the first person and you said you wanted, I don't know, Harry Posen as your mentor, then you're gonna probably get Harry Posen. But if you're one of the very last people to submit, your choice are probably gonna be a bit more limited. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but now here's the point. These mentors, these are all folks that are pretty much seasoned in the industry. They're all wanting to give you their time and help and expertise. So it's an absolute wonderful thing for you guys to take advantage of. Now, combined with that, one other thing that I think we want to try to do for the first time ever is I want you to get in groups of 3 that you will pick one of these folks to go out to breakfast with, to lunch with, to dinner with, or drinks or something, and that basically the 3 of you will pick that. So in other words, you guys may all say, all right, the 3 of you say, we want to go to lunch with Tony Trella, all right? Ryan will help coordinate that and saying that the 3 of you want to go to lunch with Tony Trella, we'll get the date set up, and we'll get that organized. So that any of you that want to go beyond just the normal mentorship relationship, these guys really do want to interact with you, okay? And a couple of these folks, you know, they're semi-retired and retired. They really want to, you know, get involved. Okay, this is, you know, something they really truly believe in. All right, so that's issue number 1. Issue number 2. I asked for your bios. Okay, you know, I've only gotten about a half a dozen of those. All right, what we want to do with those is we want to create basically an online resume book. But we want, in this case, just your like a 3 or 4 or 5 sentence bio of yourself with a nice little picture and probably your email address and your, if you've got one, an electronic portfolio. All right, and we want to try to get that posted here within the next couple of weeks because this is also an opportunity. Our advisory board, believe it or not, they actually look at that stuff, okay? And they really want to, matter of fact, a couple of them, you know, came up to me and said, you know, I met this person at the event the other night. I want them to be my mentee.
Is that only for the mentor?
I'm sorry?
Is that only for the mentor?
No. It's also, the idea behind the bio is we're gonna put it online. It'll be available for the mentors. It will also be available for any alumni to look at, any sort of prospective employers to look at, any sort of prospective students when they were coming into the program. You know, what is the profile of the class, that sort of thing. So we want that information. We want to get that collected as soon as possible. And Brian is going to beat you down until you submit that information to him. So make sure that you get that taken care of. Other than that, I think that pretty much takes care of it. Hopefully it was a productive day.
My question is more for, this is my first
Semester. Right.
Do I wait until next semester?
You can go ahead and submit your bio now
Where do you submit it?
to Ryan.
Just text it to you.
Yeah, I'll send you the format you were late. So I'll send you the exact.
Okay, all right. Any other sort of questions? Now, once again, just so, I mean, I know there was a teensy bit of confusion about this. This course, the financial modeling course, we have 8 sessions. Therefore, you have basically, well, you have 7 quizzes plus the basically your project on the 8th class session. And so what I will do is I'm probably going to drop your lowest quiz, okay? So that basically means if you're going to be out of town, if you just don't feel well, if you can't get it done for whatever reason, that's going to be the one that's going to get dropped, and then everything else will count. Does that make sense? Okay? Yep.
Well, sorry, the submitting bios part. So I know he also asked for e-portfolios. I know that.
If you have one. If you don't have one, then usually that blank.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, maybe you could just send it to him once we start, like.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, any other questions? You feel reasonably good? I know you're tired. All right, get out of here, enjoy yourselves. Nope. And turn your calculators back in, and don't steal my power cords.
I look at 117. Oh, I have to do it the right way? Yeah, you gotta go slow.
Let's see what happens with that.
I don't know, I just sent you the.
Because you might, everything else. All right.
Feeling good or bad? Do you want the same school I went to? Okay. Illinois, North Carolina? Yeah. That's why how are you?
Just with that presentation, judges,
Yeah, that was our first group.
I just did that too.
What's the next set of classes?
oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I don't have to do this. I'm graduating. I'm old enough to be the mentor. You're from out of town, how are we gonna do it? I'm there, if you want to invite me, but who are we gonna go with? Harry Posey's the coolest. Posey, he's just an old.
I got, my mentor is.
Yeah, we're all.
I'll go if you want me to go.
Okay, we'll make him pay though. Hey, fair. Thank you very much. And if it's not Harry, look, whoever. Whoever.
Okay.
1600.
I just called
Literally a lineup of models that they use.
So Professor, you gave us an annual amount, instead of it's monthly. So you had to divide it. I didn't try to get it right when I saw that. I'm like, no, I put in 50,000 annually into my formula when he said it's monthly.
You use the effective interest rate calculator below to get a monthly rate.
Oh, I don't know about that. All I do is divide it into 12, it's a monthly.
But like very like a solid number, but like it take like 2 years to build.
Who's meant to be a trigger?
Some
Yeah,
one's like
I know that.
18,000 square feet, like big
Okay.
houses, you know.
Do you,
All right.
well, so question.
Have a good weekend, everybody. I'll be looking for those grades from Professor Thomas. Not that any are going to be bad.
You know Rio Vista?
Yeah, he's actually got them down in the office right now.
What?
I'm going to tell you that GIS class is very challenging.
Yeah, but mainly
And what happens is that computer lab,
do some on the.
if you don't use a dark cursor from the back with any lighting on, you can't see where he's clicking on.
So that's the difficulty with teaching like people class like this and the same thing. You know, it's just like everybody's got a different computer, everybody's got a
No,
different.
that was all all this was good. But that particular class. No, that particular
Yeah.
class, goes all that shit. And he goes so
One of these
fast.
days, man.
If you don't
I'm
catch
just
up,
starting
it's,
out, bro. But
thank God for
it's out
that.
there.
Yeah, no, this was.
What's up, big guy?
Like you're used to the technology and everything. It's crystal.
Question about this morning, before you. This morning there was no quiz on this flat.
That's correct.
Okay. And you said the video is gonna go up, and
Yep.
anything I should know that's important from the